Welcome back, and we're just picking up where we left off on the last episode. We're just on that lower section, heading up to the first step at the first knoll in Butcher Country. And this is where it starts to get really steep. You can see the Discovery there just starting to skate on some of that stuff there. And no change in tyre pressures for old Disco. It's still running the 20 PSI we let them down to at the start of these episodes. And if it's not broke, don't fix it. It's been working well for us at 20 PSI, and you can just see there coming over those rocks that there's a little bit of movement in the sidewalls as they wrap around. But to let them down any further, you run the risk of damaging the sidewall. And to where I left off in the last episode, I'm really trying to capture this with the incline and looking back the other way. You can see now I've switched around to the front view of the vehicle just to get how steep that is coming up out of the valley. And you can start to get a bit of an idea there, looking back down to the McAllister, and how steep she is going up. And it just keeps on climbing up to Mount Howard at 1,750 metres up on the high plains. And I had a lot of trouble trying to operate the drone in this view with the way how dense the scrub is, and then it was a little bit overcast, so the light level wasn't really good, so it was triggering sensors, and there was multiple crashes on the side of Butcher Country trying to film this, but it just didn't want to play the game. I spent a fair bit of time trying to capture it. And we're lucky to have Butcher Country track, because back in the early 2000s Parks wanted to close it, and it caused a big stir, and there was big protests in the city, and it ended up being left open, so we are lucky to have it. That's a good view there coming up out of the valley. It has had quite a few changes since I first drove it. You can see some of the changes here, and just where because the dozer's been through recently, but you'll see where there wasn't a lot of the switchbacks and stuff like that in it. It was pretty well straight up, and there was some real gnarly rocky outcrops that I think turned over a fair few vehicles, so they've ironed them out. So it's just a little bit more tame than it used to be, but it's still a really, really nice track to drive. It's a challenge, great views, definitely worth doing. It's just as good up or down, but probably the preference would be heading down it to the McAllister, simply because of the views you get off it on the way down. We're now up and over the first knoll of the climb, and we're on a more gentle sort of climb, heading up to the next steep section. I've cut out most of the boring and more mundane bits of the drive, with still keeping as much of the track as I can in the video without boring everyone to tears. But anyone that's looking to do the track will get a really, really good idea from these couple of videos on Butcher Country. This next section I'm coming up to at this corner was pretty much what it was like most of the way up back in the day. But now it's a lot more tame. Some of the rock ledges were, 3 or 4 times worse than that one there. And they were right in the middle of some of the steep sections as well. There definitely was some tricky stuff. The first time I drove butcher country, I had a little short wheelbase Defender I built, and I had a set of 36-inch super swampers which I brought in from the US because there was no such thing as big tyres in Australia back then, and they were TSL SXs, first of the tread on the side, if anyone's familiar with the super swampers, and the shorty with the super swampers on it, and let down to about 15 psi, just used to float over everything. Really did. It was just, nothing was a challenge. And the vehicle itself wasn't lifted, as I've mentioned before in other videos. I'm not a fan of lifting vehicles and ruining their balance. But I'd modified the inner guards and that so that it could run the 30, they were 12.5 as well. They were quite wide, the TSL SXs. But I'd modified the inner guards so that they'd travel and get the maximum travel without lifting the vehicle. You can see we're coming up again to another steep section where I'm trying to change around the angle and get some views back down. Now, as great as that little short wheelbase Defender I built was, the old Disco here just nails everything just the same. It just cruises up everything. You know, it's in its DNA, the Disco. Just an incredible vehicle, that 100-inch wheelbase. Just scale anything. And that's the key, is the 100-inch wheelbase to a great four-wheel drive. It's about the right formula where you don't have to lift the car, and well, you don't have to put big tyres on to get clearance over things, but the bigger and the longer your wheelbase it is, the more you have to put big tyres on it to get it over things. And that's what makes these things so great, and the original Range Rover Classic that this platform come off. But you can see the old girl's just soaking it up like it's nothing. Anybody keeping an eye on the footage will see that I've trimmed up a few trees during this section. You can see leaves flying and stuff like that. And also you can see all of those changes to the track that I've mentioned as we're heading up. This was another gnarly section here. And this particular section was quite bad for the rock ledges. This is a really steep section here, and didn't matter how I filmed it, you just could not get how steep that was. But there was a reason the track was so eroded there, because the water was just rushing straight down it, tearing it up. One of the great parts, and where butcher country's been lucky, is that the rip and tear crew with the big tyres, everything's full throttle, haven't been able to destroy the track because it's got such a rocky base. There's no great big huge ruts in it from the big heavy vehicles trying to get up there in the wet. And while this doesn't look too bad here on the camera, it's definitely a climb. It's a big, long climb all the way up here. Like a lot of the tracks in this region of the high country, they really just started out as stock routes for high country cattlemen, and butcher country is no exception to that. It's because it heads down onto the McAllister and then heads right out, and McAllister takes it down into the, past the Cola and right down the McAllister Valley, down to Maffra and places where they could sell the cattle. Most people would be familiar with all the huts in this region as well, all the high country cattlemen's huts, the Lovicks, and down into Woonongata, and even the Howard hut is a hut that was one of the Bryce's huts from Woonongata. One of the tracks that did get closed off at the time they were trying to close Butcher Country was Zeka Creek, and that was a really good track. Yeah, it was even better than Zeka Spur, and Zeka Spur is like a super highway these days. The original Zeka Spur was quite steep with all switchbacks and that in it, and it was heavily eroded. It was still a goats track, probably around the mid-90s, but Zeka Creek was twice as bad, and that ended up getting closed off, which is a shame. But that took you down into Woonongata as well. It is a little bit hard to complain about some of the closures, because when you see, like, it four-wheel driving's absolutely boomed from when we were first doing it. It's just coming up to another one of those rock sections. This used to be wild back in the day, but it's you can see why there was like just a great big step into some of these, because the track hadn't been touched for decades. But yeah, you can see why they're closing down some of the tracks. The way they're getting treated now that there's such a boom in four-wheel drive and there's so many people are coming out, they just can't, parks can't cater for everyone. As in the amount of people that are coming through. People have a whinge, and it's hard. You've got to look at it from the park's point of view as well, as there's not endless money. People don't want to pay taxes and they whinge about fees, so and then there's not enough money to pay people to work at parks, and it just snowballs. So yeah, I can see why some of the stuff is getting closed, just by how many people are coming out. And the other thing too is 20 years ago, and the start of people posting stuff online, when a lot more people were starting to come out to the high country four-wheel driving, mate, there was just so many vehicles rolling over on these tracks because they hadn't been touched for decades, and so they had to come through and do a lot of work on the ones that they didn't close. And it really was the end of an era where people taking personal responsibility for their own actions. You come out here and you rolled it over on some of these tracks, you knew what you were getting into, and you didn't blame everyone else or the government. These days it doesn't matter what happens, people fart and they want to blame the government for it. It's a different world we live in. But back then, you had your own personal responsibility, and if you had a bad day, you sorted it out and you got yourself out of there. I personally wish we could return to it. The world's gone mad. And, it kept the people away that just weren't cut out for this sort of thing. And this is the signal here for the end of the climb. This is the end of the main climb anyway. And it still climbs up and down bits and pieces, but that big, following the ridge line out of the McAllister Valley, this is it. This is a good view up. That's up towards Mount Howard and the Bluff. We're looking there, across there now. And back over towards Buller, and then as you come back around. And this is looking back where we've just been. And you can see and get an idea of the climb up from the top end here. And looking back out. And that set of mountains across from the one you can see in the foreground, that's across to Mount Skeen and that there, and then that's back down the McAllister Valley towards Lacola, and that bit of open ground there's just north of Lacola. And this is heading back up to the track junction that'll heads down to the Caledonia track, and then Butcher Country veers off to the left and heads back up onto the high plains. actually headed down to Nicola this time on this trip. It'd been probably about, it was over 10 years since I've been to Nicola anyway. But definitely did miss the Nicola nightlife. And that was a really great marketing ploy from the Nicola General Store back in the day. And it was on all sorts of merchandise, and I'm sure they made a lot of money out of it. Good on them. But it was nice to meet the new people that are taking over the store and that. They're nice people, and it was really cool to call in, sit down and have something to eat out the front. And just taking Nicola again, first time in just so long. After years of it just about being there every weekend, it's been a long time. There's some rocky outcrops here. Old Disco's just walking over them pretty easy. I just picked the harder way around here just to give you a bit of an idea just how easy it does it and how good those tyres are at 20 psi. Unfortunately I didn't film it that well. And you can see here we've got the treps fitted. We've worn all the tread off the side from all that hardcore four-wheel driving. It was a real pain heading up that first bit of Butcher Country because the sensors kept shutting down on the drone, it wouldn't fly. There's too many shadows, a couple of crashes. I was trying to get it with the fall away as I was climbing to get an idea of the climb out of the McAllister Valley there. But it kept shutting down, kept crashing. It was a pain in the neck. And then it'd stop and it'd pause and you'd be on this gnarly bit. You get right up and you're standing on the top of it and the drone wouldn't move. Just sitting there looking at you. I'll tell you what, if you were in an old manual 60 series you would have run straight over the top of it. There's no way you would have been sitting there in an old 60. I'm sure most people have pulled over at this section and had a bit of a rest and a look around, maybe even brewed up. And as easy as old Disco does it off-road, it does it on-road as well. Because it hasn't been modified and hasn't got all the four-wheel drive trinkets and all that sort of thing, it goes really, really well on road. Handles beautifully, just the way it was intended to. And you can see how well it works on this real steep pinch here, coming around this section on these all-terrains. And this is coming down to our track junction with the track that heads back down to Caledonia and Dingo Hill, off to the right hand side here, and that's Butcher Country heading back up over the hill. We're going to be heading back up over the hill this time, but that section back down there towards Caledonia gets quite gnarly. It's also steep and it's got rocky outcrops and that in it as well. And up we go. It's been a long time since I've been down it, so I don't know how well made the track is now, but it was very gnarly back in the day. It's listed as red, I think, at the moment. We haven't broke any traction at all at this stage. Over the last couple of days. I hope you're enjoying the drive along in the Disco and a bit of a look around. I've cut out a fair bit of it. There is some mundane stuff in it, but just I really wanted to leave this sort of thing in it so that you can get a fairly good idea of what the track's like. We're probably right up now on Butcher Country at the highest point before it drops down a bit and comes back up at the high plains. So you can see that the growth's a bit more sparse here. It's not as thick. One of the things I'm trying to do with these tyres as well, you probably don't, is I'm trying to stay up on top of the sharp stuff instead of rub up against it. So having no steel in that sidewall will definitely take one out, that's fine. Yeah. Just in case the 37s have been in there. I couldn't be bothered winching it out at this minute. Bit of a first glimpse of the high plains here, and wildflowers are definitely out this time of year. It's quite good the whole way through, especially in some of the later videos that are coming up in this series, heading back down over Silver Mine and all that. Some of the wildflowers and that were out in the middle of the bush was unbelievable. And you can see we're getting right up high now. See, this is interesting here. The ants are starting to take over the side of the tree. past another junction on Butcher Country, but we're sticking to the left and we're following the main track up to the high plains. There was another track off to the left here that headed back down to the McAllister, but that's all it done is it went down to the river and back. A very, very steep track. I couldn't find it. I was actually going to go down and film it. Whether I drove past it, not knowing, but it wouldn't surprise me if it was closed, because that was a really steep track heading down to the river there. But it was also a really great spot to get down and camp. You pretty much had it to yourself. It was one of those tracks that was right out of the way, and you got to be pretty dedicated to head down, because all you've got's your long drive back up. But some of those end up being some of the best tracks. I've found some really great gold mining stuff in the northern high country, just like that. Following a dead end track, which I knew was a dead end track, was heading down to Dartmouth on the dam itself, and about 3/4 of the way down. It was listed on the map. I mean, it had the cross picks, or the cross pick and shovel. Just come across it. It had all the carts and the rails and everything there, and the stamper, and it's all just been left there because it was so steep to get out of there. But it was another great track, great find. Now these are some really great views off here as we're heading north. We're heading downhill now and looking out towards Mansfield Buller area. There's what's in the front of the screen there. But she's really steep off here. A few switchbacks in it. That usually says everything you need to know about it being steep. But back in the day, she was just straight up and straight down. And you can see all those tyre marks out there on the far side of that switchback, where she's so sharp around that bend that there's been a few 3-point turns made out there by the bigger Forbies. But really, check out the views. It just doesn't get any better. And just cruise down, first gear, low range, no rush, and just take it all in. Make a coffee at the top, and if you're not in a leaf spring rig, because you can see how steep this is getting here, even though the camera's not doing it justice. But in a coil spring Land Rover, you could still get away with drinking your coffee there in between bumps. And that's it for another part of Butcher Country. Tune in for the next one, where we get up to the top of Howard and a good look across the top of the high plains.